So in terms of research on violence against women, we already have, and it is growing still, an evidence base that maps the prevalence of different forms of violence. So we had an understanding of the diversity of violence that women might expect to experience. We also in particular have research that looks at violence within the workplace and digs into the kind of vulnerability of different groups of women. Some of those studies looking at work are limited to women engaged in microfinance, so home-based businesses, women that are engaged more in the corporate sector to a lesser extent, but there's some emerging work that's looking at work-based harassment within that sector. We have research that's looking at women who work in the garment sector, so we have some understanding of the kind of challenges they face in that particular work. Also, there's some literature that looks at women who are engaged in the informal entertainment sector, but again, that is limited in the context that we've been looking at. So where the evidence is lacking is really linking the two, and linking the two in more of a holistic sense. So not just looking at work, but also looking at the different forms of violence that might be happening outside of the workplace, and then how that may or may not be intensified by earning an income. Would you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say that generally speaking, before we started looking at the evidence for this project, there was a general assumption in most of the literature that engaging in paid work was empowering for women. However, when we started to look to see what the experiences of women actually have been, we realised that there's some real challenges to that dominant perspective that need to be made. The literature that existed was somewhat conflictual in much of its findings. So while some literature noted that working allowed women to have greater financial independence and therefore suggested that they had greater decision making at home, other literature noted that there could be backlash from husbands or partners or other family members who felt that the traditional role of male breadwinner was being challenged by that engagement of women in the workplace. There was also a smaller amount of literature that demonstrated the difficulties that women can face as a result of working in public spaces. So the exposure to violence in public areas from people who are strangers to them, which they would never have experienced had they not been engaged in work in the first place. So these were the key issues that we really had to start thinking about when we began the project.